Consciousness is often treated as if it refers to something fundamental and self-evident, yet its meaning is rarely examined with precision. It is used to describe awareness, identity, perception, and even experience itself. But these uses are inconsistent and often contradictory. Through a metaspherical lens, consciousness does not function as an underlying substance or container of experience. It appears as a label applied after interpretation has already organized what is appearing. In most frameworks, consciousness is positioned as the center from which everything is known. It is described as observing, processing, or containing experience. This creates an immediate separation between an observer and what is observed. That separation serves as the basis for further explanation, leading to questions about how the observer relates to the observed. The so-called hard problem of consciousness emerges from this assumption because it attempts to explain how a separate observer could produce or receive experience. The problem does not arise from a lack of information. It arises from a false starting point. From a metaspherical perspective, there is no separate entity that observes experience. What is called observation appears within experience as a form of interpretation, thought labels, perception, memory references prior labeling, anticipation projects continuity. This entire sequence is then grouped together and called consciousness. There is no independent structure behind it producing these activities. The label is applied to the activity, and the activity is then treated as if it belongs to something. This creates the illusion that consciousness is primary. In reality, the label is secondary. It is applied after interpretation organizes what is appearing into something that can be named and referenced. Once the label is applied, it is treated as a stable foundation. This stabilizes the illusion of an observer. The observer then becomes the center of identity, and experience is organized around it. The attempt to locate or expand consciousness reinforces this structure. Practices aimed at raising consciousness, expanding awareness, or refining perception operate within the same assumption. They treat consciousness as something that can be developed or improved. This leads to continuous effort directed toward modifying experience in order to reach a more desirable condition. The structure that produces the illusion of consciousness is never questioned. It is strengthened through repetition. The same issue appears in attempts to understand consciousness conceptually. Philosophical models attempt to define its nature. Scientific approaches attempt to measure its correlates. Both approaches assume that consciousness exists as something that can be studied. The more it is examined, the more complex it appears, because the examination itself reinforces the interpretive structure that produced the label. Metaspherically, what is called consciousness is not an entity, a container, or a foundation. It is a description of interpretive activity appearing within experience. When interpretation is active, the sense of an observer appears. When interpretation discharges, the need for an observer is no longer present. Nothing disappears. What disappears is the assumption that something is observing. This is where surrender, allow, be becomes relevant. It does not attempt to refine consciousness or expand it. It does not attempt to locate a deeper observer. It addresses the mechanism that creates the illusion in the first place. Surrender is the discharge of the attempt to control or organize what is appearing. The idea of an observer depends on control because it assumes something is directing experience. When that attempt subsides, the sense of a central controller loses its basis. Allow does not mean passive acceptance. It refers to the absence of resistance to what is already present. Resistance reinforces the separation between an observer and what is observed by creating opposition. When resistance is not active, that separation is not maintained. B is not a state that is entered. It is what remains when nothing is being imposed. It does not depend on the presence or absence of consciousness as a concept. It does not require refinement or development. It is not something that appears. It is what is already present when interpretive activity is no longer organizing experience into a structure. From this perspective, the myth of consciousness is not that awareness exists. It is that awareness is owned, located, or produced by something. The belief in consciousness as an entity creates the illusion of separation. That illusion generates endless attempts to understand, improve, or transcend it. When the need to define or control experience discharges, the concept of consciousness is no longer necessary. Nothing is lost. What remains does not require a name. This is the language of the spheres.